my practice area was designed and built out of an era where there was a hugely collaborative, there still is a hugely collaborative sense of camaraderie within the Web3 environments. Everyone felt that this is game-changing technology and wanted to be in a position where they were helping each other. My name is Ali Khan. I'm a lawyer by trade. My jurisdiction that I trained in is England and Wales. I'm a regulated solicitor by the SRA. However, the vast majority of my career has been split between England and Wales and the UAE. I used to work for DLA Piper in Dubai many years ago, having trained as a barrister. And I focused on cross-jurisdictional litigation, which basically means that if you know the UAE, you've got multiple different types of jurisdictions. Some of them are common law, some of them are more civil code, the onshore jurisdictions. And so when it means going to court and navigating the nuances of a dispute, you need strategists like myself who are able to sort of plot that before going through to actually drafting and advocating in court. Having trained as a barrister, I then trained as a solicitor for various reasons, partly because litigation is great and I love throwing the kitchen sink when I've got a fight on my hands. But at the same time, I felt that the law was evolving and institutions in the law are evolving. And so there needed to be a way of being able to access new areas of law that were going to be manifestly affected by the change in technology. So I started my practice in Web3, decentralized finance and crypto about a couple of years ago from AS Legal, which was a firm myself and colleagues from Dubai built in Dubai. My practice area was designed and built out of an era where there was a hugely collaborative, there still is a hugely collaborative sense of camaraderie within the Web3 environments. Everyone felt that this is game-changing technology and wanted to be in a position where they were helping each other sort of help the wider ecosystem. And so within that environment, very quickly managed to position myself as a go-to for those in London who needed UAE advice, help, and vice versa, those in the UAE who needed assistance on what was happening in the UK. Naturally, if you're in crypto, you get to know the regulations of many jurisdictions. And yeah, I mean, but aside from crypto and aside from Web3 and aside from lawyering, I'm also a musician. I'm also a terrible comedian. I have a comedy channel online where I get to let off my steam. Used to be a journalist in Syria and Damascus before the war. And I studied Arabic and history as an undergraduate. So there's multiple ways in which my life sort of came out, and I'm very glad I'm giving so much time to the Web3 community. AS Legal is formed under the idea that those with international caliber of client service, of client thinking, and of international business exposure are usually limited to a life within Magic Circle or international law firms in the United Arab Emirates. Very rarely do you have that caliber capable of being world class, but focused in a boutique manner on regional businesses, regional laws, to the extent that we're one of the only international caliber firms that have full rights of audience and on all the courts in the UAE, including the onshore courts, where you can only advocate if you're an Emirati, one of our partners being Emirati. So out of that, we were in a very good position to have exposure to a lot of different arenas within the development of Web3 and indeed AI in the UAE. I myself sat on the focus groups for VARA, the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, back in December 2022, before the VARA regs were published. And because my personal practice, I've split between being in Dubai and being in London, I found that in Web3, this is probably my own personal view, and I don't think it's necessarily the case as a expression of the great talent in the UAE at the moment. But I found some of the most interesting projects and the interesting thinking I found happens to be in London, and the execution for that tends to happen in the UAE. I, along with a fantastic gentleman called Matthew de la Fuente and his colleague Chloe Nightingale, we've been working on these roundtables over the course of the last year and a half, where we bring together quite a few thinkers and doers in the space in London, close the door, and full Chatham House rule. You get regulators, lawyers, operators, some of the big names that all literally bitching about the space. And in that free environment, a huge amount of very interesting thinking happens where we can actually help each other in the ecosystem. That's the sort of stuff you do in London. London's very good for. Applying that through into somewhere like Dubai is also very useful, because the benefit of being in Dubai is sometimes that you have the capacity to execute on things that you wouldn't have the capacity to execute on in London, and then vice versa. Where the benefit of being in London is there are plenty of things one can do in London which one simply can't do in Dubai. So that's how my practice has evolved. I have a number of different clients from over-the-counter trading desks, exchanges, some very interesting projects in, for example, the food supply and agriculture disruption space. Then I have some spatterings of interested projects who'd like to learn more about the regulatory space in the UAE. We can provide advice for that. And of course, there's this new burgeoning world of the tokenization of almost everything, which is interesting and sometimes needs a little bit of nuanced approach too. But those who are getting it right are getting it really right. And so I'm really enjoying working with a variety of these parties. Aside from Web3, doing quite a bit of work on AI and cybersecurity and corporate governance. So a big part of our practice is working with parties such as the Institute of Directors in England and Wales, and representing their interests in the form of sort of promoting the IOD, because the IOD is one of the big hubs for corporate governance. And from my background, I've worked as the president of a students' union, head of a charity. I've worked as the head of various companies. Governance as a concept can either be thought of as a colonial hangover, or it can be thought of as something which is incredibly useful as a way to create decision making in especially new environments that are decentralized. So I work with some brilliant people like Dr. Nick Allman, for example, on how to think about creating new governance styles using technology to help service the idea of collective decision making. Cybersecurity is, of course, a hugely important thing that's coming up over the course of the next year and a bit. If you haven't paid attention to it and you're a fintech firm or in crypto and you're based in the UK, the USA or the EU, get your eyes on it, or better still, give me a call and I'll tell you all about how there are a number of regulations coming your way which you need to pay a lot of attention to. Each one of the lawyers I met in this space have their own very specific approaches and benefits to give towards the wider ecosystem. So I mentioned earlier about the fact that we are definitely evolving into an environment where collaboration pays off better than competition. That's what it takes. It does take a lot of different types of lawyers to work in this space. I think from the way I'd sell myself, it's quite rare to find a lawyer who has both worked and thought in terms of downside, so litigation when shit hits the fan, as well as upside and opportunity. So looking at the way one drafts contracts through to approaches regulations from a best practice approach as well as a practical approach, right? There's a philosophy in a lot of tech spaces where one asks for forgiveness rather than permission, which is not necessarily what a lawyer wants to hear, but having a lawyer who knows that is the way a client is going to want to think, and having to try and navigate that within the purviews of the spirit of law is quite a challenge. Those like myself who are practiced at that are probably in a strong position to be able to service their clients. On top of that, there is a reality that being from working in multiple jurisdictions, having a lot of life experience outside of the law, and being in a position where you've entered into specifically things like Web3 for more than just the money. You're looking at it because you've lived a life, you've lived a series of life experiences, and has led you to a particular mode of thinking that helps you believe in the idea of the technology in the first place, even before you decide to build a practice in it. That in itself is, quite rare amongst lawyers. Luckily, I know quite a few lawyers. There's a network of us who I'm really proud to share the space with, who also believe in it, But you're always going to get those lawyers who look at the numbers in Web3 now and say, "Oh yes, that's why. I mean, I was always an OG, and look at me, I'm a DJ." That kind of stuff you can smell from a mile away. It's one of those things where at the end of the day, each client needs the lawyer that was built to serve them, and I'm not going to decry against a number of others who are phenomenal lawyers with strengths I certainly don't have. But at the end of the day, it is about which one is good for you for the particular need that you have. I liked the idea of that collaborative environment where a client comes in and is able to pick and choose the services they needed on their terms. The law is it's a closed shop. It is by nature an unfair business model, right? There's got a barrier to entry to be able to practice. And that barrier to entry is not necessarily the fairest barrier of entry, if we're being perfectly honest. In terms of those who might believe in, all the values that the law puts forward, justice and serving society, etc. And so I'm a fan of environments that do try and disrupt that sort of access to the law. And one thing Somoto was built to do was to create that. It wasn't just about servicing the Web3 community who might have brilliant projects, might have brilliant ideas, but didn't have a one-stop shop they can go to, like a white glove service for them to be handheld through the more complicated stuff, then that's not their strengths. Sure, Somoto does that, that's great. But what Somoto also does for the professions that join on there is that it does provide an environment where you can, for example, work with other lawyers that not necessarily in your practice or necessarily, in your space on a multi-jurisdictional project, for example, right? Where a client comes in and says, "Oh, I need, Ali in the UAE, I need X in London, I need Y in New York." And suddenly you're on a call with a number of different parties working together on a project, even though you're at different firms, etc. All of that created and driven by the client. Traditionally, that would happen if you're a multi-jurisdictional corporation with the network and the money to be able to get different lawyers from law firms. And even then, it would be quite rare. But in this environment, and when you've got it, when you're working with lawyers at smaller firms and such who are able to be quite agile and erudite in terms of managing conflicts of interest, managing the Chinese walls, managing circumstances where they can work collaboratively together, it actually works out really, really well. So that I like. I like innovative business models within a very stale industry. And so I'm a big fan of what Somoto is aiming to achieve. Finally, the reason why I really like Somoto is because it saw the necessity of things that need to be centralized in a world that is aiming to be decentralized, right? Being a full-on decentralized, advocate, great, completely understand why. Being a full-on centralization advocate, understand why. Finding a nuance and a blend in a new space where you can allow for the parties and the power to remain decentralized, but the aggregators to act as the centralizers in terms of access is quite a new. I thought it was quite an interesting thing. It means that you get the fairest outcome of both worlds: the fairness of what decentralization brings, and the fairness of access that centralization brings. Which is why I was an early adopter of Somoto, or an early joiner of Somoto, because I thought, it was, as and when Somoto gets this right, it's going to provide a huge amount of good to the wider community.